My beloved child, stop for a moment, because something about your soulmate changed last night, and the reason behind it is far deeper than you realize. There was a moment when everything around them became quiet, and in that silence, a truth they had been carrying for far too long suddenly became impossible to ignore. They may have looked completely normal to everyone else, but inside, their emotions were moving in a completely different direction. Something reminded them of you. It could have been a song, a place, a message, an old memory, or even something so small that nobody else would have noticed it. But for them, it opened a door they had been trying to keep closed. And what happened next is the part you need to hear carefully. Your soulmate began thinking about the things they never said to you. The words they swallowed. The feelings they disguised. The moments when they wanted to reach toward you but convinced themselves to stay silent. Last night, those memories did not feel distant anymore. They felt immediate. Real. Personal. And suddenly, your soulmate was forced to face one uncomfortable question. What if I have been pretending not to care when I actually care more than I ever admitted? That question hit them harder than they expected. Because sometimes the person who says the least is carrying the most. Sometimes silence is not the absence of emotion. Sometimes silence is what happens when someone does not know how to explain what their heart is experiencing. But here is where the story becomes even more powerful. Your soulmate did not simply remember you, they remembered a version of themselves that existed when they were connected to you. They remembered how different everything felt when your presence was part of their world. They remembered conversations that seemed ordinary at the time but now carry an entirely different meaning. They remembered your energy, your patience, your little reactions, the way you understood things without needing every detail explained. And somewhere in that reflection, they recognized something they had never wanted to admit. They may have underestimated what your connection meant to them. That realization can be overwhelming because it changes the meaning of the past. Suddenly, moments they once dismissed begin looking like signs of something deeper. Words they once ignored begin sounding different. And the biggest realization may be this: they are beginning to understand that avoiding their feelings did not make those feelings disappear. It only gave them more time to grow quietly. That is why last night felt different. Their emotions reached a point where pretending became harder than being honest with themselves. They may not have told anyone what was happening inside them. They may not even have fully understood it themselves. But something shifted. A wall inside them weakened. A truth they had buried beneath distractions began rising back to the surface. And the truth is not necessarily about what they did last night. It is about what they finally admitted to themselves. There is another layer you need to understand, because this is where the unspoken secret becomes deeply emotional. Your soulmate may have been carrying a fear that if they opened their heart completely, they would become vulnerable in a way they were not prepared for. They may have wondered whether you still felt the same. They may have questioned whether too much time had passed, whether too much had changed, or whether they had already missed their opportunity to express what was inside them. And last night, those questions became louder. Not because something terrible happened, but because something inside them finally became clear. They realized that keeping everything hidden was not giving them the peace they thought it would. It was only leaving unfinished emotions between you. So imagine them sitting alone with their thoughts, replaying memories and asking themselves what they would say if they had one completely honest conversation with you. No pride. No pretending. No carefully chosen words. Just the truth. What would they finally admit? What would they apologize for? What would they explain? What would they tell you about the feelings they never knew how to express? That is the emotional doorway opening right now. And the most surprising part is that your soulmate may have realized that what they miss is not simply having someone around. They miss the specific connection they felt with you. They miss being understood in a way they rarely experienced elsewhere. They miss the feeling that someone could see beyond their surface and recognize what they were trying to hide. That realization can make even the strongest person emotional. Because when you finally understand the value of something you once took for granted, your heart does not always respond with words. Sometimes it responds with tears, silence, and a long night of remembering. And now, listen carefully, because this is the part your soulmate may never say first. Beneath everything they have shown on the outside, there may be one sentence they have been afraid to say: "I never stopped caring the way you thought I did." That is the secret hidden underneath the silence. They may have changed their behavior. They may have created distance. They may have acted unaffected. They may have convinced themselves that moving forward was easier than confronting what they truly felt. But last night, something made that strategy collapse emotionally. For a brief moment, they stopped running from the question and allowed themselves to feel everything at once. And that is why the energy around this connection feels different. Something has been acknowledged internally before it is ever spoken externally. Your soulmate is beginning to understand that some connections cannot simply be erased because circumstances changed. Some memories remain because they carry meaning. Some people stay in your thoughts because a part of your story is still connected to what they taught you, how they changed you, and what you never got the chance to say. So do not rush past this moment. The most important revelation may not be what your soulmate did last night. It may be what they finally realized about you. They realized that the unspoken words still matter. They realized that pretending to be unaffected did not erase the connection. And somewhere deep inside, they are asking themselves whether it is finally time to stop hiding behind silence and acknowledge what their heart has been trying to tell them all along. There is something your soulmate has been trying to understand about you, and last night brought that question closer to the surface than ever before. They began wondering whether you somehow knew what they were feeling without them saying it. They wondered whether you could sense the distance between what they showed and what they actually carried inside. And that thought became impossible to dismiss because every time they tried to move their attention somewhere else, their mind somehow returned to you. One memory led to another, and another led to a moment they had almost forgotten. Then came the realization that the connection was never about one perfect moment. It was built from dozens of small moments that quietly became meaningful. The way you looked at them. The way you listened. The way certain conversations stayed in their mind long after they ended. Your soulmate may have spent a long time convincing themselves that these things were simply memories, but last night they felt different. They felt unfinished. And that is why their emotions became so intense. They were not only remembering you, they were confronting the possibility that they had misunderstood their own heart. Somewhere between the memories, they began asking themselves what would happen if you knew the entire truth. Would you understand? Would you forgive the silence? Would you still recognize the person behind all the confusion? These questions created an emotional pressure that they could no longer easily ignore. And there is one thought that kept returning again and again. What if the person I was afraid to lose was the person I should have been honest with from the beginning? Then something even deeper surfaced. Your soulmate started remembering the moments when you gave them an opportunity to speak, and they chose not to. Maybe you asked a simple question and they gave you a simple answer because the real answer felt too vulnerable. Maybe there was a moment when they almost told you everything, but pride, uncertainty, or hesitation stopped them at the last second. Those moments may have seemed insignificant when they happened, but last night they appeared differently. They began connecting the dots. They started realizing how many times their own hesitation had created distance where honesty could have created understanding. And this realization can be incredibly emotional because nobody wants to discover that their own silence contributed to losing something meaningful. Your soulmate may have replayed one particular interaction over and over, wondering what might have changed if they had simply said what they truly felt. That is where the breakdown came from, not weakness, but emotional exhaustion from carrying too many unsaid words for too long. They may have wanted to reach out, then stopped themselves. They may have opened a conversation, typed something, thought about sending it, and then hesitated because they did not know how you would respond. And even if they never physically sent those words, the fact that they were thinking them matters. It means the internal conversation has already begun. Something has shifted from, "I wonder if I still care," to, "Why am I still carrying this if I do not care?" That difference is enormous. Because once someone asks themselves that question honestly, they cannot easily return to the old version of the story. The past begins looking different. The silence begins sounding louder. And the person they tried to place in the past suddenly becomes impossible to ignore. But there is one emotional detail that may surprise you. Your soulmate was not only thinking about what they lost, they were thinking about what they could still say. That means their mind may have moved from regret toward possibility. They started imagining a conversation where there were no games, no pretending, no carefully constructed image, and no need to hide behind casual words. Just honesty. They imagined looking at you and finally explaining why they acted the way they did. Why they pulled back. Why they became difficult to understand. Why certain emotions were never expressed clearly. And perhaps most importantly, why your presence affected them more deeply than they ever admitted. They may want you to know that not every silence meant indifference. Some silences came from confusion. Some came from fear of being misunderstood. Some came from not knowing whether they were emotionally ready to say what was true. But now they are beginning to understand that silence has its own consequences. And that realization may be the most important turning point in this entire story. Because when someone finally understands the cost of hiding their feelings, they begin looking for a different way forward. They begin thinking about honesty instead of avoidance. They begin valuing clarity instead of assumptions. They begin asking whether one sincere conversation could finally release everything that has remained unsaid. And if your soulmate has been distant, do not automatically assume that distance tells the whole story. Sometimes the loudest emotional battles happen where nobody else can see them. Last night may have been one of those moments when the person who appeared quiet on the outside was experiencing an entire storm of memories, questions, longing, and realization on the inside. And now we reach the part that your soulmate would probably struggle the most to say directly. Deep inside, they may be realizing that they never truly wanted you to become a stranger. They wanted time to understand themselves, but somewhere along the way, they discovered that understanding themselves also meant understanding what you meant to them. That is why the memories keep returning. That is why certain things still remind them of you. That is why the emotional weight of the past has not disappeared simply because time moved forward. Something about your connection left an imprint that they cannot explain away. And last night, instead of fighting that truth, they finally allowed themselves to feel it. This does not mean you should chase them, force a conversation, or assume you know exactly what they will do next. The deeper message is about what has changed inside them. Their heart may finally be catching up with what their mind has been avoiding. And once that happens, everything they previously believed about this connection can begin to look different. The secret is not that your soulmate suddenly became someone new overnight. The secret is that they may finally be becoming honest with the person they have always been inside. The person who remembers you. The person who still wonders what you would say. The person who wishes certain words had been spoken sooner. And if you could hear the one sentence they were unable to say last night, it might be this: I wish you knew how much I was feeling when I acted like I felt nothing. That sentence explains more than 1,000 surface-level actions ever could. And this is only the beginning, because there is another truth buried underneath everything they realized last night, and that truth is connected to the one thing they secretly hope you will understand about their silence. What your soulmate realized after that emotional night goes even deeper than the memories they were replaying, because they began to understand something about the connection that they had never fully admitted before. They realized that what they felt for you was not easily replaced by distraction, distance, or pretending to move on. They could keep themselves busy, surround themselves with people, focus on other parts of life, and act as though everything was perfectly normal, but the moment the world became quiet, the truth had a way of returning. And last night, that truth became impossible to ignore. Your soulmate began thinking about the version of you they knew when everything felt natural. They remembered the moments when they did not have to explain themselves because somehow you understood what they were trying to say. They remembered the comfort of your presence, the conversations that lasted longer than expected, and the strange feeling of being completely seen without having to reveal every hidden part of themselves. That memory hit differently because they suddenly realized that they had been comparing other experiences to what they felt with you without even admitting it. They may have wondered why certain connections never felt quite the same, why conversations with others sometimes felt empty after being so meaningful with you, or why one simple memory of you could change their entire mood. And that realization created a painful question inside them: did I walk away from something I was supposed to understand? They may not have an answer yet, but the question itself matters. It means their perspective is changing. The story they once told themselves is no longer completely convincing. And somewhere inside that uncertainty, your soulmate is beginning to recognize that their feelings were never as simple as they tried to make them appear. There was also another memory that may have touched them deeply, the memory of a moment when you needed emotional honesty from them and they gave you something less than the truth. Perhaps they changed the subject. Perhaps they acted casual. Perhaps they said they were fine when they were anything but fine. Whatever the exact moment was, they may now see it differently. They may realize that you were not asking for perfection. You are asking for authenticity. And that distinction has been sitting heavily on their heart. Because when someone finally understands that another person was offering them genuine emotional space, they begin recognizing how valuable that opportunity actually was. Your soulmate may have wondered whether you ever understood why they behaved the way they did. They may have wondered whether you interpreted their silence as rejection, when internally they were simply struggling to process feelings they had never learned how to express. And this is where their emotional breakdown becomes important. It was not simply about missing you. It was about realizing how many opportunities for honesty had passed while they were busy protecting themselves. They may have thought, if I had been honest then, would everything be different now? That question can replay endlessly because there is no way to rewrite the past. But there is something they can still do: understand it. And that is exactly what they appear to be doing. They are studying their own behavior. They are looking at the choices they made. They are recognizing patterns they previously ignored. They are beginning to see that their greatest obstacle was not the lack of feeling, it was the inability to communicate that feeling clearly. And then came the realization that may have affected them more than anything else. They started wondering whether you had already stopped waiting for an explanation. This thought created a completely different kind of emotion inside them. Because suddenly, they were no longer only thinking about what they wanted to say. They were thinking about whether you would still care enough to listen. They wondered if too much time had passed. They wondered if you had changed. They wondered if the person they remembered was still there. And beneath all those questions was something incredibly human: uncertainty. Your soulmate may be realizing that they cannot control your feelings, your choices, or the way you interpret the past. They can only control whether they finally become honest about their own part in the story. That realization may have brought tears because it forced them to accept that silence does not preserve connections forever. Sometimes silence creates unanswered questions. Sometimes people assume the other person knows what they feel when they actually have no idea. And sometimes the most important words are the ones that were never spoken. Last night, your soulmate may have finally understood that. They may have imagined telling you everything they could never say before, not because they suddenly have every answer, but because they are tired of hiding behind uncertainty. They may want you to know that their feelings were complicated, that their actions did not always represent their heart, and that some of their distance came from not knowing how to handle the depth of what they were experiencing. This is why the emotional energy around them feels so different. Their mind is no longer simply remembering the past. Their mind is trying to understand what the past means now. And here is the revelation that brings everything together. Your soulmate may have finally recognized that the person they were trying hardest to understand was not you, it was themselves. They spent so much time wondering what you were thinking, whether you cared, whether you would stay, whether you would understand, that they forgot to ask the most important question: what am I actually feeling? Last night, they asked it. And the answer was far more emotional than they expected. They realized there was still tenderness there. Still curiosity. Still an attachment to the memories. Still a desire for clarity. Still a part of them that wanted you to know the truth rather than remember them through the incomplete version of the story. That does not erase the past, and it does not guarantee what happens next. But it changes the emotional foundation completely. Because now they know that pretending did not give them closure. Silence did not give them peace. And avoiding the subject did not make the connection meaningless. If anything, the absence of answers made the questions louder. So the secret you need to hear right now is not simply that your soulmate broke down last night. It is that during that emotional moment, they may have discovered the exact truth they had been avoiding. They still have words for you. Words they never finished saying. Words they may have rehearsed privately without ever speaking aloud. And one of those words may be the beginning of an explanation you never expected to hear. The story is not ending with the tears from last night. Those tears may have simply opened the door to the truth that comes next.